Hello Steelers, and welcome to this review of I Ain't Been Shot Mum. This is by Two Fat Lardies. This was originally produced, I think, in 2011. This is actually, I think it's about version 3 or 4, I can't exactly remember which, but it's the latest one, the one that is currently on sale now. It's been around for quite a while, and as I say, even this version is quite old at this point. Now you're probably going to say to yourself, well, why are you doing a review of this? Because you already have a how to play of the I Ain't Been Shot Mum rules, and I do have that. It's a 4-part series that you can find on the rest of the channel. I will put links to it in the description below, and also some cards as well if you can see those on the screen. But that is more about the mechanics of the game, and literally I just went through the game and just took out the rules and showed you how you actually employ those rules as you're playing the game. But what that doesn't tell you is really how the game itself works, if that makes sense, from an actual game point of view. And I played I Ain't Been Shot Mum quite a lot, or not for a long time, but I played it quite a lot a few years ago, especially during the lockdown. It was one of my first after-action reports, was the Stalingrad game that I did using I Ain't Been Shot Mum as a solo game. Basically, it's a demonstration to how to play solo games. Myself and my friends have played quite a lot of I Ain't Been Shot Mum, and we really enjoyed it. We came to I Ain't Been Shot Mum pretty much after Rapid Fire. We'd played Rapid Fire to death for like 15 years almost, probably 10, 15, 20 years getting on for. And then I picked up a copy of this, and it kind of blew the lid off Rapid Fire completely. I don't want to slag off Rapid Fire because we had some great games of it, but this, although Rapid Fire is battalion level, this is company level. The organisations are practically the same on the actual tabletop, and this really works well, and it's a great game. So this is going to be a glowing review, I'll tell you that now. There are a couple of things in here I'm going to mention that I'm not particularly keen on, but I'll talk about those as we get to them. But yeah, I played a lot of I Ain't Been Shot Mum. It did kind of take me a little while to get into it because it's very different to things like Rapid Fire, for example, or for any other kind of game that you're playing. It is essentially it's really anything from 6mm through to about 20mm. If you're playing it with 28mm figures, which you could do, you'd probably need quite a big table. It does say that at Lard Island they play it in 15mm, so that's kind of like the recommended size. So it also means as well that you could quite easily, if you wanted to, use Flames of War figures for it. You just have to have some way of showing casualties and things like that, which an easy thing to do just with some dice, but you could use Flames of War bases quite easily. And it does say, interestingly, speaking of Flames of War, it says the other World War II miniatures game. Now I'm assuming that is a bit of a reference to Flames of War. I can't be 100% sure, but I think it probably is, but that's the strap line there. But yes, as I say, as he says, it's War Games rules for fighting company-sized actions in World War II by Rich Clark and Nick Skinner, so the two of them were organised in this. Now from a historical Two Fat Lardies point of view, this was developed after they first wrote their Charlie Don't Surf rules, which actually were published after these, and I do have a copy of Charlie Don't Surf, and they're very similar in the way that they work from a basic mechanic point of view. However, there's quite a lot of differences in Charlie Don't Surf because it's a Vietnam game, and you've got the insurgencies of the Viet Cong and things, and they operate differently. This one is more, how you say, standard, I suppose you could say, way of playing Charlie Don't Surf. And I know that Charlie Don't Surf was their original game. This then developed out of Charlie Don't Surf, and then they published Charlie Don't Surf afterwards. And that's kind of like the history of the game itself. It comes in obviously before Chain of Command. This version at least is about 4 years earlier than Chain of Command. However, it does have quite a few similarities in that it has leaders, but in this they're called big men. That very much places it in the Lardy canon, I suppose. They stopped using the term big men after a while, and they started using leader. So Sharp Practice 2, for example, has the term leader rather than big men. Chain of Command has the term leader rather than big men. It doesn't replace Chain of Command, and Chain of Command doesn't replace it. However, out of the two games, I would say Chain of Command is my favourite, because I think it is. You can tell the development within the Lardy rules area world and that is your Chain of Command is definitely a step on from this. There's a couple of things in this, as I say, there's a couple of things in it that I just think, you know, are of its time, but don't detract from the actual overall game itself, and I'll talk about those anyway when we get into it. It's full colour rule set. The reason I bought this is because I've been thinking about buying it anyway. I lent my old PDF printed copy to Dean the other week, and I just said to him, just keep it, because I've been thinking about buying a copy of this anyway, so I wanted to. And then when it came through, I thought, well, let's do a review of it, because there's still a lot of people out there who probably never heard of Iron Beast Shotgun, and I think if you are a World War II gamer, you really should have a look at this. Even if it's just, you know, to pick up the rules and see how they play and things. I think that it is a fantastic game. And actually, reading through it again for this review has really got me thinking about playing it again and wanting to get back to it, because I've not actually played it for a couple of years. I remember it well enough to know how it plays, but I just have a bit of a hankering for playing it. Also, I mean, you know, if you watch this channel a lot, you'll know that I really like O Group. O Group is battalion level, so again, it's not a replacement for O Group, and O Group doesn't replace it. It fits perfectly in that hierarchy between Chain of Command and between O Group from my point of view, so it's well worth checking out if you're interested in that kind of thing. As I say, it's 104 pages, full colour pages in here, absolutely packed with examples and colour photos, really nicely laid out, very simple, very easy to read as well, which is always good for a set of rules. There is a comprehensive content, however there isn't a comprehensive index, so that's a mark against it at least. But to be honest, most of the rules in here are so simple that you wouldn't, after a couple of games, most of it you can pretty much hold in your head, and that is the Too Fat Lardy's ethos. I mean, Richard talks about this on some of his live streams, where he said that, you know, the games, he wants the games to be simple, so you're not referring to the rule book so often. And that's really what works here. Once you've got, you can pretty much play the game almost apart from the firing, off your head, just because you know exactly what you're doing and how you're doing it. But what I'll do is I'm going to go through it. I'm not going to go through every single rule and every single page. I'm just going to talk about some of the stuff that's interesting in this, the things that make it stand out as a rule set, and some of the things that, as I say, but I look at a little bit askance these days, but I think they still work anyway perfectly well. But what we'll do is we'll change the camera up. I'll dive in and show you from the bottom up how this game is, and have a bit of a review of it. Okay, so here's the book. As you can see, this is the cover, really nice cover, great photograph on the front of that as well. On the rear page we've got the fire table. I'll get to this, I'll talk about this later on in a sec, but first page, you can see it is full colour on the interior as well. We've also got the Plastic Soldier Company advert here as well. This is probably before their battle group was ever released, so they were obviously advertising with the Too Fat Lardies at the time. Nice quick introduction here, just on the first page. Just talks about some of the ideas really of the behind the game as much as anything else. And sort of one of the things that I'm going to point out here is it says, with any war game from time to time there will be instances where events not covered in the rules. In such situations, common sense and sportsmanship should prevail, with the players agreeing on the chances involved when rolling a d6 accordingly. And this is something I'm very much in favour of when it comes to wargaming. It's fun. We should be having fun, you know, that's the main thing. I'm not particularly interested in competition or tournament gaming. I just want to have fun at the end of the day, and this is definitely what it's all about. So as I say, I mentioned it, we do have a full contents page, and it's quite good actually. It is broken into the specific areas, so you could quite easily find what you're looking for just by looking at this. It's not an alphabetic index, but it is you know, pretty well sort of laid out contents page. Then we've just got a bit of a background about the game itself, how to play the game, and timescales and ground scales and things. Now the thing you'll see here straight away is we do have a card deck. We also have blinds as well. I'm going to talk a bit about the card deck and also the blinds as how they play. Just before, because I know people love to know what it is, but the ground scale, it says here, I'm just going to read it out to you. In the end, we settled on 12 inches being approximately 80 yards. This looks good with figures between 10 and 20 mil in size, and it's pretty much perfect fit with 6 mil figures. So that's, yeah, the ground scale is really 6 mil, but it says on Lard Island we generally use 15 millimeter figures. I've used 15 mil figures, and I've never had any problems with it whatsoever. It is a card activated game, and what we have here is a glossary of terms, and we have a really nice big section here on the cards themselves, and these can still be downloaded from the Too Fat Lardy's website. I checked today that you can get these cards. There are other ones out there as well on the interwebs. Some people have made their own. There's some on Arts Cow as well that you can download or buy in poker-sized cards. These ones are a bit smaller. I printed these out and cut them out, and they're really nice and easy to put together. So what we have basically is you draw a card, and then when your unit comes up, you activate that unit or that big man, or you do a particular support or artillery fire or whatever it is, and then you also have a tea break which ends the turn as well. So this is very much friction, which you find in a lot of Too Fat Lardy's games, very much like the tiffin card in Sharp Practice, for example, or the Time for a Snifter card in Through the Mud and the Blood. Those kind of things. So it's basically, you know, breaking the action. It just stops the turn and everybody pauses and has some breath. But we have quite a lot of cards, because obviously the Second World War is quite a complicated war in itself. There's a lot of different bits and pieces, and this, I think, is a really nice way of doing things. When you've got cards, you can add cards, you can take them out, you can really make that deck work for you or against you, depending very much on the scenario. And it adds that bit of friction, and it really adds that little bit of, just a bit of suspense. And also to mention as well that it works really well for solo gaming, because you don't know what's going to happen next. So you just play a card and then play that unit to the best of its ability at the time. And you're kind of half reacting a little bit, but also you're trying to manage your forces under you as well. So this describes every single one of these cards here. Let me just show you here. So the tea break, there are things that will happen at the end of a turn. So for example, any units that are automatically spotted are deployed. Any deployed unit that's not activated can fire at a unit target within 9 inch, but they can't move or spot. Any reserved dice are used. This is for actions for later on. Pins are removed, and then suppressions become pins. Talk about those when we get to the firing. And then you also add any cards to the deck, or remove any as well, and then just shuffle them. So that's kind of how your turn ends. And this happens, you know, it can happen quite quick, and it can happen quite slow, because you could go through the entire deck before you hit the tea break. Now, in other Too Fat Lardy's games, sometimes when the turn ends first, if it's the first card you draw, something will happen. In this one it doesn't. So like if you draw the tiffin card in Sharp Practice, there is a random event. In this, it's not the case. And it also does say as well, you can add in 2 tea break cards if you don't like too much friction, and then you only end the turn when the second tea break card has been drawn. So you're just increasing the length of the turn basically. But this is how it plays. So it is basically a card-driven system that plays and works pretty well. Then we get onto the rules themselves. This is the important part, and this is the bit I'm going to talk about more than anything else, I guess, because most of it is relatively simple. When your unit is drawn, you have activations. Now, depending on how many figures are actually in your sections, depends on how many actions they get. And also we have big men as well, and they also have a number of command initiatives. So depending on their level, 1, 2, 3 or 4, they have a command initiative of 1, 2, 3 or 4. They also have a command range of up to 12 inches, and they can do various things with those command initiatives. So very similar to the leaders in Sharp Practice, or even the leaders that you'll find in Chain of Command. So if you played any of those games, you're going to find this very similar kind of effects. Because of the level of this being a company level game, you don't have the granularity of Chain of Command. you have a section usually between 8 and 10 men, but you don't really take into account what weapons they're carrying because they just will fire as a unit. The Germans, I think, get a bonus because they generally got more automatic weapons, but apart from that there's very little else. They're very similar. But then you've got your big men who, when their card is drawn, they can activate and they can get other people to activate as well. They can also reduce shock, they can also reduce suppressions down to pins and get rid of pins as well, so they're well worth having around. And the emphasis on leaders is something that runs through all Too Fat Lardy's games. It's all about those, literally the big men on the tabletop in the battlefield, moving about and doing things. So it's very similar as well with, as I said, so you got the big man there, what they can do in a turn. And then, let me just move on. We've got little bits about vehicles here. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I don't want to go into too much detail about various bits and pieces. I just want to talk about some of the general bits and pieces for the rules. And this is the thing I was talking about here, unit actions. When these are activated, these can either be activated by the card. So if you draw a platoon card, then you will get, you activate that whole platoon. If you draw a big man card, he can activate, and then he can activate units within that platoon up to his command initiatives. So the higher, the better. But obviously they can only activate once per turn as well. They can generally do various actions. Just to go through them here to show you, they can move 1d6 inches, take cover, cross the low obstacle, cross high obstacle, enter an unbarred vehicle, building, mount or dismount a vehicle, fire with 1d6, attempt to spot or attempt a task. Spotting comes in with blinds. We'll cover that in a second. But this is a bit here that is relatively important for what I was talking about. So you have this chart here that basically, these are laid out in the army list, which again I'm going to get to later on. But depending on how many figures you have is how many actions that unit has. So for example, elites, if they've got 7 or 8 men in them, they will get 4 actions. If that is reduced to 5 or 6, they get 3 actions. If it goes down to 4, it becomes 2 actions, 3, and then down, if there's only 1 or 2, they don't get any actions at all because they're pretty combat ineffective at that point. Regulars, so let's just see, good regulars for example, they get a maximum of 3 activations or actions in a turn. And then you get down to green and militia, they have a maximum of 2 actions per turn. So this is how they manage those differences in the troop types. And then this, as I say, is these actions you can do. You can only move up to a maximum of 3 dice, so if you have an elite, you can only use 3 of your actions to move. You can't move with 4 dice, you can only move with 3. And like with Too Fat Lardy's games, movement is on dice, so it's variable. So you can move, but then you can also fire as well. And I'll talk more about that. And you basically add these dice together. You say, right, okay, I've got 3 actions. I want this unit to move to, and then I want them to fire. And you can take these actions in any order you like. Just as long as you declare it before you're doing it, and that's it really. You say, right, I want to move 1d6, then I want to fire 1d6, and then I want to move them again 1d6. So you can just take any of these actions, any order you like, throughout the game itself. So dead easy stuff. You've got other bits and pieces like from Chain of Command, as I mentioned. So Overwatch, for example, is basically they just will go on to Overwatch and look out over an area and fire at anything that moves. One other thing to mention as well is we do have a lot of examples in here, which are great as well, and these are very specific and really nicely written and fun. Blinds, I've mentioned them. I'll talk a little bit more about these. Most units, in most cases, will start the game on a blind. You can print these from the Too Fat Lardy's website. I've printed mine out, laminated them, and I use them. If you laminate them, you can use a dry white pen to write on the bottom what they are. But basically, blinds will move about on the tabletop, unbeknownst to your enemy as to what the actual unit is. But they can be used to do things like spotting, but they can't be fired at, and they can't fire either. So they're quite good for, you can also use dummies as well here. So it's basically a system of friction, of moving about on the tabletop, having hidden movements in plain sight, if that makes sense. So you're not actually moving about on a map, you're actually moving about on the tabletop, but using these blinds, and your enemy doesn't know what they are, and don't know if they're dummies or not. So it's whoever can spot the ones first is probably going to get the advantage, because they're useful because they can't be fired at as well, which is always good. Just a bit of a mention here of the movement. As I say, it's all on D6s, so this is a typical two fat lardies thing, and you can only use up to 3 of your actions to move. So for example, in this example here, this one moves with 1d6 across the broken ground, crosses the linear hedge here using 1 dice or an action, and then uses another dice to move another 5 inches on the other side of that. Very simple, very easy. And this is what I mean, you can remember most of these rules once you've got playing. It's very simple, especially if you're with somebody who knows how to do it. Spotting is a big thing in this, and as I mentioned, you do have to try to spot blinds, but once you're on the tabletop you can be seen by somebody as long as you're in line of sight, and it's worthwhile remembering that you can pretty much fire at anything as long as you can see it. Usually terrain is the thing that is going to be the line of sight blocker, rather than the actual length of a firing, you know, an arbitrary length for firing. So spotting is basically done, I think it's with 2d6 if I remember correctly, and you just have to get over the number here. With some additions and subtractions. If they're in the open, you can see them up to 9 inches automatically. If they're 9 to 24 inches, you need a 4 or above on 2d6. 24 inches over, 7 or very simple stuff, and you just add some things as well. And then if it is a blind, it is spotted, it is been just placed on the tabletop. Dead easy, nice and easy way of doing, as I say, hidden movement. Now firing. Now, I did mention that there is something that I didn't like so much about this game, and this is it, and it is the fire table. Now, there's going to be people out there watching this who will probably disagree with me vehemently, and they will say that they don't mind it. Now, the firing table itself is not so bad, however, I just feel it's quite an old school way of doing things. Wargaming these days has moved on from fire tables. There are online there are a few people, and also Dean, my mates, have made a bucket of dice style firing tables for this, but we found it didn't really speed things up. It was just about the same, because you still got to calculate it. And what I mean is, when you're in a game, I like to stay in the game. So for example, when I'm playing Chain of Command, I know how many dice a rifle is when it's firing, I know how many dice an LMG is, and when you get to know these things, they kind of stick in your head a bit. So you can just pick up the dice and roll them, and then you're looking for, you know, whatever number you need to hit, 4, 5, 6, whatever, 5, 6. In this, you roll dice depending on how many actions you use to fire. And then you just add them together. So it says, you can see here, infantry dice, and it tells you down here up to 30, and then you look across depending on what you're firing. So you've got close range, effective range and long range here. And then this tells you exactly how many casualties it causes, and also if they're pinned or suppressed, the P and the S. So it's quite a simple system, but as I say, it just kind of takes you a step away from the game a little bit, and I prefer just to roll a load of dice and just have a result from that. It's incredibly minor. I'm going to say that, and I know it's incredibly minor, but it is. It feels like it's something, you know, we had it in rapid fire and we completely threw it out and changed it up for a bucket of dice game. And this kind of, it feels like it's just a bit of a leftover. I think if this was redesigned and there was another version of I Ain't Been Shot Mum, this probably wouldn't be in it. I'm just guessing at that. Again, I don't want to emphasise that I don't like it too much, but I'm just saying, you know, that's my negative about this game. That said, very nicely, they have actually printed it on the back of the book anyway, so you don't even need to open the book to get to it if you don't need to. So it's perfect, to be perfectly honest. You know, that's a really nice way of doing it, instead of having it buried halfway through the book and having to find it every time you want to fire it. Straight there on the back of the book. So hats off to that. Now that said, I've attacked it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to claw this back, and what you can see here on the fire table itself is, so these are the results. As I say, a P is a pin, an S is suppressed. And I've already mentioned you need a big man to be able to reduce a suppressed to a pin and then take off a pin. They come off also at the end of a turn as well. A suppressed turns into a pin and a pin disappears at the end of the T break. What you have here is the distances for firing, so I'll just go through these so you know what they are. For infantry, it's up to 9 inches for close, 9 to 18 is effective range, and then over 18 inches is long range. For machine guns, AFV and artillery, it's up to 18 inches, and then over 18 inches is effective, so close and effective for those two. What you will notice as well at the top here is you have this: great, okay, and poor, and this is within each of these blocks. Now, this is very much a Kriegspiel thing, and they talk about it actually earlier on in the rules as well, that the fire table comes from playing Kriegspiel. In Kriegspiel, in the original Kriegspiel at least, you assess how good the shot is. It's either great, okay, or poor, and then you decide from that what the firing effect is. This, when we first saw it, blew our little tiny minds, because normally in a lot of wargaming rules you have so many pluses and minuses onto firing. You know, if you're firing over a hedge, it's a -1. If you're firing at somebody at close range, it's a +1. You know, etc., etc. That's like very typical wargaming. This is very different. You actually assess between you, the players, or the umpire if you have one, as to what kind of shot it is. So it's either great, okay, or poor. So for example, you could say you've got some infantry, you're firing at some infantry, they're standing in a field, they're behind a hedge. That's probably an okay shot, because you know you're firing through a hedge with rifles. Modern battlefield rifles are probably going to do pretty good. However, it might be raining, so it's probably a poor shot. Or it might be foggy, so it's a poor shot. However, there might not even be a hedge, and they might just be standing in the open. Then it's a great shot. And you just assess it. And I think as well, I was speaking to Neil McGurk about IABSM, because he's a big fan of it as well. And he was, we were saying that, you know, on forums, it's one of those things where a lot of people, when they first come across it, they just don't understand it. And I think we didn't. I felt that as well. But now, having played it and understanding it, I think it's a really good way of doing it, because again, it's not that tournament mentality. It's just you're playing the period and not the rules. And it's a very simple way of just working out, instead of having loads and loads of modifiers either way. You've only got 3. You just say, well, it's either poor, okay, or great. You know, are they running across the field? Then it's probably a poor shot if they've used 3 dice to get across. And it's really down to the players just to decide exactly what they want from that. And I think that is a really, really good way of doing it. And I don't think there's any other rules that I've seen where this has come up. You'll notice that 17 is also highlighted here, just to mention that this is Churchill's lucky number apparently on the casino on the roulette wheel. So they've just highlighted it, so it's just slightly different. But yeah, I think, you know, overall, despite the fact that this is a table, despite the fact that it does slightly take you out of the game, it is a great way of doing it, I think, and it's a much better way of doing it than other games where you are just adding loads of modifiers or taking away modifiers just to arrive at your final number. You just basically make it up. So that's pretty much how firing works. You also take shock as well. You may take shock if you are taking hits, and as always, shock will also, as in other Too Fat Lardy's games, it will affect either movement and or firing as well. We cover all the other little bits and pieces of weapons you would expect to see in the Second World War. So, for example, weapons teams. So we've got tripod-mounted machine guns and auto cannons, independent LMGs, flamethrowers, light mortars, because just to mention, LMGs, because they're part of a section, they fire as that section, either 1, 2 or 3 dice. Anti-tank teams, snipers, nice little section on snipers. Basically, they roll 2 dice and you choose which of the dice you want to use. If they roll a double, then they basically bugger off. It's that simple. It's really nice and easy. A little bit of talk about casualties as well. So once you actually see how many hits you take, you then roll to see if they are dead or alive, basically. So it's a near miss on a 1 or a 2, shock on 3 or 4, and dead on 5 or 6. Dead easy to remember. So you just roll those however many hits you've taken from that casualty, from the fire table back here. let's just roll it back. So say, for example, here, if you are firing at somebody, you rolled a 13, you're close range and it's an okay shot, you've hit 5, so you've pinned them, hit 5, you roll those 5 dice, 5 or a 6 they're killed, 3 or 4 is shock. And as I say, shock is the thing that just causes units to slow down and to get worse at firing. This is all covered here in the shock section as well. Works really well, and shock is one of my favourite things about the Too Fat Lardies rules. Just the fact that it is such a simple and easy way of dealing with morale without having to go through an entire morale step that a lot of games do. It works really well. You also have here as well loss of bottle, so if you get more shock than men in the section, they will start to fall back, and they might just fall back off the table as well. So you don't have forced morale in I Ain't Being Shot Mum, but you do have the loss of bottle, which will force you off the table anyway. Close combat works very similar to a lot of the other Too Fat Lardies rules. You basically add a d6 for each man in the combat, and then just add various numbers, roll them. 5s and 6s are kills, with a 6 also causing an extra point of shock. If you played Too Fat Lardies rules, you'll know these. There's very little difference between these and pretty much every other close combat game session within the other games as well. We also go on to direct fire support. As I say, I'm not going to talk too much about everything in here because there just isn't much point, and I don't want this to go on forever and ever and ever. But just to give you an idea that, you know, we've got direct fire against vehicles. Obviously, it's Second World War. You have hits on tanks, and this is again very similar to the kind of stuff that you'll find in Chain of Command. It's almost, I think it's probably been almost lifted word for word from this. You roll your strike dice, they roll their armor dice, the defender, when you've hit them. If you have more hits than saves, then you just go basically onto these. So if it's 3 net hits, the AFV is destroyed. If it's 4, it explodes. Otherwise, you will roll the dice to see what happens to it. Very simple stuff, very easy, very nicely done as well. Then a few other bits and pieces about infantry and AFVs. And indirect fire as well is another one. This is done through the cards. You draw a forward observer or a big man who can spot for the artillery, and then you will add the support card, and then when that comes up, that's when your support fire comes in. So you don't get it automatically, you will get it at some point in the future. It might not turn up in the next turn because the T card might come up before that, but it's just a nice way of adding that little bit of friction. And then you also do deviation as well on that. All this is covered, as I say, Second World War stuff, you have to have it. There is aircraft in here, air attacks that come in. They are rare, but they do happen. So we've got rules for that. Also for trying to drive them off as well. And then just some of the battlefield features. So we're talking here about booby traps, engineering, buildings as well, and all the other things that you'll come across as usual in a war game. We also have optional rules as well, including some card variants that if you want to add a little bit of flavour into your games, you can do. You can basically put any card in you want, really. If you have a blank card, you can just say that is one of these cards quite easily. It's just a way of making the game customizable for you, basically, as the player. And that in itself is one of the things that I find really interesting with these kind of card-driven games, is because you can just literally make them your own completely. You can put what you want in. You can put in individuals if you want, named individuals that you can have on the tabletop, just to add that little bit of narrative. Turn cards here, for example, if you really want a set number of turns in your game, you just put a turn card in, and then when they get drawn out 6 times, game's over, for example. Nice way of doing stuff. On the top of that, we also have this as well. We've got the aces, the king of the battlefield. So this is for particular personalities, for particular people who do stand above the big men. And again, these can be put in, just add in as cards, and also figures on the tabletop. And it just covers some of these. For example, you get a +1 for shooting if you've got a tank or an anti-tank ace. Really nice. Then this is the other bits that people are probably interested in, is recruiting your forces. This is how you create your units. Now, there are no points system in this game. That's probably going to blow quite a few people's minds, I'm fairly sure. But what we do have is we have the Normandy handbook, and there are, I should have mentioned this earlier, but there are a lot of other handbooks already produced for I Ain't Been Shot Mum. It is really, really well served for handbooks for the Eastern Front, for the Far East, for Normandy, for I think for Africa. There's pretty much every theatre is covered, almost at least, and if not, you'll be able to find somebody who's done something about it somewhere on the internet, on the Lardy forums. But there are no point systems, but you have basically your force here. So this shows you exactly what you need or what you can have, and it just explains here a little bit about what you would be using. So this is a British Rifle Company, for example. These are historic orders of battle, and you would add things and take things out. So just to go through this to show you exactly how these things are laid out. This is the British one for Normandy. Bits of background history here, of course, obviously about the thing itself. So you've got company headquarters, which is a big man of level 3 or 4. Then you've got 3 platoons led by a big man, either level 2 or 3, you decide. 3 rifle sections of 8 men, 1 Piat team of 2 men, 1 2-inch mortar team with 2 men. And they're all the same. So that is your basic company. Then you also have your support options, which you can then add in. So you got like machine gun platoon, for example, mortar platoon, anti-tank platoon, tank troop option 2, tank troop option 3, artillery troop, and also radio net. If they are all on a radio net, so there are rules for using radios in the game itself. And then on the other side, we've got the actual stats, for want of a better word for these. So you have your veteran infantry, regular infantry, or your poor regular infantry. So this is what the British get. And again, this shows you how many actions they have depending on how many men there are in their sections. Then we just gives you the vehicles that they're using, their armor values, their weapon strikes, what speed they are, which affects what the dice they roll, pluses or minuses, and then any notes as well on top of this. Let me just jump over. We've got the German forces here as well. So this is just in the back of the book. German force, just to show you there. So we have, let me just show you, a Zug, for example, is a big man level 3. 3 rifle groups of 8 men, and up to 2 Panzerfaust 30s per group. So again, so 3 of those, and then you also get these support options as well. Moving on, we've got the United States. So we've got Britain, Germany, United States, and that's all in this book as well. So you don't need to get any of those extras straight away. Then we talk about scenarios and actually setting up scenarios, and this is one of the good things about the Too Fat Lardy stuff, is that they always have a lot of scenarios in their books, and it's something that some other rules battle group should take note, that if you at least have a starting off scenario for people to play as soon as they buy the book, it's always a good thing. So here, although you don't have points, it explains how you select your force. So it says basically you either have an infantry platoon, machine gun platoon, mortar platoon, anti-tank gun battery, or an artillery battery or troop. And then you decide the quality, and they declare it. So it's either green, regular, veteran or elite. And then if the player's force is outclassed, then they can add an extra additional platoon for each level that their force is outclassed. So it's not exactly an exact science when it comes down to support points, but it certainly it tips the balance. So for example, if you have an elite unit versus a veteran unit, the veteran unit would have then 2 platoons against 1 elite platoon, and it makes quite a difference. Just explains about which bonus cards you would want to put in, and then also your setup and your blinds. And as I say, we have scenarios now. So these are basic ones, these are generic. So we've got scenario on a meeting engagement, flank attack, column attack, hasty defense, breakthrough, and each one of these just explains exactly, you know, what the mission parameters are, and also what forces you have in these units as well. So we've got breakthrough as well there, and then a counter attack. So 6 generic ones. However, we also have as well on top of this historical scenarios, and this explains how to make historical scenarios. and where they get their information from, which is always great, where to get maps from as well, and just how to basically put together a scenario that is specific to a theatre that you want to play in. This is always good. And then we also have some more scenarios, and these ones are now based in Normandy. So scenario 1, North of Caen, it says, well, it's a non-historical scenario, but it is based in Normandy, and this is your basic introduction scenario. So you have British attacking, clearing this area, and this is 3 platoons versus two German platoons. So you've got your briefings here as well, all the cards that you need. It just basically sets them out for you perfectly well, really nicely done. And again, lovely, well illustrated as well. That's not all, but we also have another non-historical, but set in Normandy with historical forces. Scenario 2, south of Cherbourg. This is the US versus the Germans. The action at Galmanche. This is a historical one. So this is British again against the Germans. And then the Canadian VC. And then again, it is another historical one. So again, there's at least 4 more scenarios on top of the 6 generic ones that we've already got. So basically you're getting 10 scenarios just in this book as well. So it's worth it just for that. And you don't have to use them at Normandy. You could quite easily just swap these forces for Soviets and Germans, play it on the Eastern Front. Italians and British do it in the Western Desert with a bit of a change here and there. But you know, you basically got everything you need there. And that kind of brings me to the end of the book. As I say, on the back page is this fire table, which is a real bonus, so you don't have to go digging through the book to find the fire table itself when you're playing the game, and it is a relatively simple thing to use. So that is I Ain't Been Shot, Mum. I know it was very popular in its time. I don't know if it's played so much these days. I know some people certainly still play it, and I'm, as I say, rereading it for this review has really made me want to play it again. And I think this is an excellent book, and I think it is an excellent set of rules. Really good, really fun. If you can get into the right mindset with the Too Fat Lardy stuff, you will really, really enjoy this, I think. I do have a 4-part how to play videos on I Ain't Been Shot, Mum. As I say, I'll put the description down in the the link in the description down below, so go and check those out, and that will just give you a bit more information as to how the actual game plays as well. But at that point I will say thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this review. I've enjoyed doing it because it's just brought back a lot of good memories for me for I Ain't Been Shot, Mum. If you have enjoyed it and you are not a subscriber, please do hit that subscribe button. As usual, you can also help out the channel if you like with checking out my Patreon and also channel memberships. You'll get early ad-free early access videos and other bits and pieces here and there as well. So I will just wrap it up there and say thank you very much for watching, and look out for the next Storm of Steel video.